This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
The Jack Welch Management Institute at Strayer University helps you go from, I know the way, to I've arrived with our top 10 ranked online MBA. Gain skills you can learn today and apply tomorrow. Get ready to go from make it happen to made it happen and keep striving. Visit strayer.edu/Jack Welch MBA to learn more. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chev and has many campuses, including at 2121 15th Street North in Arlington, Virginia.
Hey, it's Noah Chestnut from The Athletic. If you're into games and sports, pay attention. I'm going to give you 4 sports terms. You tell me the common thread. Ready? Game, match, point, set. This one's kind of a gimme. The answer is how tennis is scored. Do you want more of a challenge? Check out Connections Sports Edition. It's a new daily game for sports fans. To play now, go to theathletic.com/connections.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Williams may have one eye on 2026, but also has high hopes for its new car that made its debut at Silverstone today. But how big a step forward is it, and what's behind the livery? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tell all are John Noble and Gary Anderson. Well, John, it's just you and me at the moment. Gary will be along later to discuss the car. Technically, we're still here at Silverstone. We're in the garage next door to the one they're running the car out of. Very chilly Silverstone today, but what a difference a year makes for Williams.
Yeah, I think Carlos Sainz probably summed it up perfectly today by actually saying today was a bit of a statement of intent from the team. We may get used to teams having shakedowns and press events and you roll it out for them, but if we rewind 12 months ago, you know, Williams were in a bit of a potentially disastrous state. Car was late, they missed the shakedown. They had to kind of make some compromises, which ended up the car being massively overweight. So they were been completely unable to do what they've managed today to do. So I think the fact they've done it, the fact they've committed to it, the fact they are the second team behind McLaren to do it, I think says a lot about the night and day difference, Carlos said, between 12 months ago. So, you know, big tick for Williams, I think.
Yeah, and I almost feel like they're getting the payback for the pain of the past 12, 18 months in that they pushed things very, very hard last year. They stress tested a lot of what they were doing and quite a lot of it failed. James Vowles was talking all about the Excel spreadsheets they were trying to track thousands of parts in, and you need proper cutting edge ERP, enterprise resource systems, that kind of thing. You need to make sure you've got all of that tracked. So this shows that while they're not where they need to be yet, and James Vowles did say the 26 car will be the true test of it because it's an all-new car, this does show that Williams has made substantial progress. It's more than a year's progress, really, since last year, which is good because they need to catch up.
Yeah, I think that's the message, very much the message from today. This is progress. This car today, the car they've run on track, there's nothing revolutionary on it. There's no massive overhaul. It's not a world away from what they've done before, but it's progress. It's on the weight limit, so they haven't got that problem to worry about. They've pushed a bit more of aerodynamics. They've pushed suspension. They've gone to the 25 Mercedes gearbox and rear suspension. So everything's just a little bit better than it was before. And I think that's the trajectory that the team want. It's pushing forwards with the car. It's pushed for the infrastructure. They've got more staff. It's pushing forward commercially. They've got the new title sponsor. We're sat next to a big sponsor board here. It's very packed. You go back 3-4 years, probably quite big empty blue space there.
Yeah, very much so. And James Vowles was talking up the Alsacian deal. He called it one of the biggest in sports, in fact. So not just in terms of financial value, but Atlassian. Now, you see, this is the thing about new sponsors, isn't it? That even though I was looking at it when I said it, because I knew I hadn't quite learnt it, yes, it's Atlassian. I'm going to be saying that probably a lot over the next few years. But yeah, a huge deal and massive value. But it's not just the financial value of this deal, because there's much more than that to it, isn't there? Yeah,
I think James talks about the fact they've fought off not only other teams for this, but it's other sports. So the fact that a team like Williams that didn't have a stellar season last year, it wasn't tail end Charlies and they weren't at the back and they weren't struggling to score points, but it wasn't a great season. So to do what James Vowles says, I think he said was one of the top 10 biggest sponsorship deals of all time. So we haven't got the figures. We can only guess what they are, but it's obviously a very substantial figure. Cost cap obviously limits the actual realistic impact a big sponsor gets now in terms of extra development. What it does do is it shows the value of the team. It shows people believe in the team. And also for Doralton, the team's owners, suddenly they're not having to dig into their back pockets even more and fund the team, so it balances the books a little bit better. It goes back to the previous answer, progress. Everything's moving forward. The books are getting better, the car's getting better, the driver lineup's better, the sponsors are better. Everything's steadily moving forwards, even if we can't expect a huge revolutionary step in this team to be winning from the off.
And actually, just great confidence, because it's not just that statement of intent by having the car running 12 days out from testing. It's also the fact they had the car rolling out of the garage for the first time in public view. We were standing in the garage next to it, so we had a clear view of it. So if it had gone wrong or not worked, it would have been pretty embarrassing for them. So they had to get the car out at the right time and know that things weren't going to go wrong. And that might sound fairly simple for a Formula One team, but most teams like to do it behind closed doors, just in case, because you could imagine how embarrassing it would be. And the car's been running around all day on and off. We keep hearing it. So Sainz and Albon have driven it. So just the fact they were willing to do it in public and risk something going wrong and looking stupid also tells you a lot about how far the team's come.
Yeah, because I think it went more than, because we were up here yesterday for McLaren, for example, which was a similar, timed of a shakedown, promotional day, filming day, whatever you want to call it. But their car didn't actually run that much in the morning when we were there. And to be honest, we wouldn't have known if they were behind schedule, ahead of schedule, on schedule, because it was the other side of the track, because we were in the Hilton Hotel. Whereas today, it was live on YouTube, live on their channels, live on the internet. We were all here. It was all to a schedule. So there was no chance for anything to go wrong at the final seconds. It had to run when they said it was going to run. And I think that says an awful lot about kind of the mindset of the team. It reminds me a little bit about Mercedes at the start of the 2014 hybrid era, when there'd been so much about the preparations for this era, big step, this was the big push. They obsessed at that Jerez test to be the first team out of the pit lane and did everything, even though ultimately it mattered little if you were first out the pit lane or third out the pit lane or 10 minutes late, didn't matter. But as a statement of intent, it was about being first out the pit lane. So I think for Williams, for James Vowles probably said, right, we are running at 9:30 on the dot, this car will be out the garage, do it. And they did it, and that's a big box tick, I think.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very, very positive for the team. And this is all simple stuff, but we have to remember where this team is coming from. Years of underinvestments. They didn't have the money behind them to pour money in. So it's not just that they're making up the deficit in terms of performance. They're improving the team, and you mentioned the cost cap having an impact, but that fight that James Vowles really spearheaded to get a little bit more capital expenditure permitted for the teams that were struggling more, that's all going to be used. So it's all part of getting this team to where it needs to be down the line. There's obviously a lot of talk about 2026 as well, because they're not sacrificing this year, but they've definitely got one eye on 2026. And as James Vowles said, the 26 car, first day they were allowed to, it was there in the wind tunnel.
Yeah, I mean, James has always been pretty clear now that everything is for 26, 27, 28. But I think as Sauber found to their cost last year, you take your eyes off the ball today, tomorrow's a disaster. I think this is one of the shocks that Mattia Binotto had walking into Sauber, just realising that there is no gauge for our current performance. The team's been allowed itself to drift to the back. There's no plan. There's no signs of progress. We can't judge where we are. So this is a trap that Williams don't want to fall into, and I think they won't fall into. I'm going to ask James, how do you avoid falling into this trap? And he quite a pointed answer from him. He said this isn't something that's happened over 1 year. This happened over many years, and that was his answer, which basically means he knows what's at stake. He knows that this isn't sacrificing 1 or 2 years. Maybe they'll sacrifice half a season, but I think they'll judge, see how things go these first 8, 9, 10 races, and then we'll make that decision. But he won't want to see this team finish 10th, no points, and it doesn't matter. It always matters in Formula 1.
Yeah, this absolutely isn't a Haas 2021 situation. There's a lot more at stake here.
When a vehicle is certified by Volvo, it's much more than a certified pre-owned. It's certified for that road trip you've been meaning to take. Certified for your growing family. Certified for small steps and big leaps. No matter where the road ahead may take you this season, Volvo hopes you enjoy every moment and are confident in the certified by Volvo vehicle you've trusted to take you there. Contact your Volvo retailer today.
The Glycerin 22 is built to unlock that run forever feeling, optimized for soft landings and powerful toe-offs at every point of every step. How? 2 types of nitrogen-infused cushioning seamlessly tuned into one experience. Softness has never been this powerful. Let's run there. Learn more at brooksrunning.com.
Let's talk a little bit about the expectations we've got for the team. They finished 9th last year. Difficult to make predictions. It's only the second car we've seen. But what do you think would be a good season for Williams on track?
I think regular points, to be honest. I think they had that 2023 season where pretty quick, looking very competitive, but it was very much peaks and troughs. The tracks that were needed strong top speed and straight line speed and some brilliant driving for Alex get results. Equally, the race where that car wasn't competitive, it was terrible. Last year, the consistency kind of flattened out the peaks and troughs. They weren't the brilliant performances, but equally they weren't the truly terrible ones for Alex. It was just this middling area, so his progress is slower. But I think that steady progress from where they're at probably means consistent point scoring. Because if we're talking about a world championship with 4 teams fighting for the title glory, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, that's P1 to P8 gone already. So there's only 2 point scoring positions available. So I think from Williams' perspective, if you can be banging in 7th, if you take one of the top teams out, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th every single race, I think they would judge that as an ultra successful season.
Yeah, and I think also they can aspire to be pretty strong in that midfield group, because last year there were all sorts of problems, and I think that meant that their on-track performance was worse than it should have been, insofar as 4.5 tenths James Vowles was saying was there in the weight at the start of the year. You take that off, easy to say, I know, but that made it a Q3 threatening car. So although you got the team that finished 9th last year, I think if you kind of eliminate the negatives that they were carrying last year, all those crashes, 20 crashes in 24 events, I think was the number James Vowles gave earlier today. If you eliminate all the disadvantages of that, they're on the weight, etc., that means that it's actually not too much of a stretch for it to be there, fighting regularly to be one of those potentially 2 cars that squeezes into Q3.
And probably on pure performance in terms of theoretically where that car could have been last year if it wasn't massively overweight, they may have achieved this 12 months ago. If they'd started the season on the weight limit, so you can also do your calculations, so probably would have been 8th, 9th, 10th early on in the season. Then you take away all the crashes, which obviously derailed everything. So I think they just lost, the season got lost for these 2 factors, the excessive crashes and the ability to try and just keep their head above the water, and starting overweight. So they're already starting from a stronger baseline. James says we're on the weight limit, so that's good. I think in Carlos and Alex, you've got 2 drivers who shouldn't be shunting all the time. Very, very experienced, firing off each other, will be pushing things forward. They know they're quite canny, quite intelligent, experienced. So in theory, all those elements are already in place. They just need to do what they did last year, but without these extra elements kind of scuppering their plans.
And it's also not a one-car team now, is it? Albon has had to carry a lot on his shoulders over the past few years, and while Sainz coming in is a threat to him, it's very clear that those two are working really well together already over the past few months.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard a little anecdote actually today that there was a private team event last night. Sponsors and partners and guests and Alex and Carlos were there, and they ended up being spotted in a corner chatting to each other and discussing ride heights and settings and technical aspects of the cars, and both trying to dig even more information out of each other, which I think shows where this relationship is, that it's not superficial. They're not playing games with each other in public and doing these smiley happy TV cameras and behind the scenes stabbing each other in the back and trying to get one up each other. I think there's a proper relationship there, and I think both understand the ultimate target of winning races can only be achieved if they work together now. If they scup each other now, that's not going to happen. So they need to put aside this rivalry for a little bit. And I'm sure if the team eventually gets there, then that rivalry will increase and drivers aren't as pally and get on as much. But for now, I think they know, sacrifice now, the gain comes much later.
Exactly. Well, you've got to know what your battle is, isn't it? And being the top dog in a team and fighting tooth and nail for that when you're fighting for 10th doesn't matter so much, does it? But definitely confident that the car's a step forward, much more refined and tidily put together after all the problems they had last year. Obviously, all the usual things. They want more downforce, more usable downforce, more air efficiency, that kind of thing, but also better performance in yaw, so when cornering, less wind sensitive, better through corner balance. And there's not a lot that can be drawn in terms of conclusions from the running today, because it's very, very cold. It may even be colder here today than it was yesterday. It was pretty cold yesterday, freezing in the garage. We were next door in the garage earlier, and it was icy cold. I couldn't sight properly, so I don't know how anyone works on the car coherently. But there's lots of nice boxes ticked, aren't there, that this looks like a car that can do what they need it to do. Yeah,
there's no revolution. They're not pretending that they're going from a team that was struggling to fight for regular points to unleash a massive revolution of radical ideas that's going to transform them and give them an unrealistic 3-year glide path to title glory. I think it's very much realistic ambitions, and that ambition is simply progress. There's no timeline for it. There's no miracle 5-year plan that we saw manufacturers do and ultimately fail, because you can never really predict where you end up long term, because there's 9 other teams wanting to push you down to the back. I think there's a realism of where they're at, a realism of where they're going, and a belief that all those little elements and things they need to tick off are slowly getting there.
And just a note on the car before we get into talking technical with Gary, obviously they've gone to a different gearbox spec. The rear suspension configuration has changed because they were offset from Mercedes last year. So that's just another good step, isn't it? They were a bit more conservative by necessity last year, but that just shows they're trying to make the most of what's on offer to them through that Mercedes technical partnership.
Yeah, I think last year that decision was made simply because they didn't want to wait to the last minute to change rear suspension configuration and gearbox, and hopefully to give them a head start, which ultimately I dread to think what would have happened if they had waited for that 25 suspension, then found all the problems they subsequently had. So I think the fact they've committed to it is very important. Front suspension is obviously still theirs. It's what they bought in Austin time last year to lift the car. So I think they're understanding the current concepts, they're understanding the weaknesses they need to address, and pushing on. But it is a super tight midfield. It's potentially never been closer. I think Alex Albon called it's going to be the closest season we've had. Sorry, the car's going out of the garage. It's going to be the closest season he thinks Formula One's ever seen. The gaps are going to be minimal. So I think they're going in with an open mind. As Carlos Sainz said, he says everything's been better than I expected. The car's not as potentially bad as I thought it was. Actually, it's not as far off the Ferrari when he tested last year, but he's making no predictions of where they want to be, because it's a fool's game to suggest we're going to nail our flag here and this is what we're doing. He wants to wait for Bahrain testing, see where it goes from there, and go on. Again, it's progress with an undefined, clear target.
Well, realistically, if you were setting a spread for where this car could be, it could be 5th best, it could be 10th best. It's that close, and the swing between those two will be very, very marginal. So we've been quite positive about Williams today, but we won't get that measure of the performance for a good few weeks yet, or really until we've got a few actual races under our belt, but very, very encouraging. And the fact they were able to put this event on today, which has been great to be at, because there's not many standalone launches, is very encouraging. So lots of boxes ticked. When the serious stuff starts, hopefully that will be reflected on track. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined as ever by Gary Anderson for his technical appraisal of the car. So, Gary, what have you made of what you've seen from Williams so far?
Well, I suppose over the last couple of days you could say we've seen sort of both ends of the 2024 Constructors' Championship cars being released. And it's a tough one really for Williams because, to be honest, at the end of last year, they had a lot of accidents and incidents. So I don't think they truly finished the season the way they potentially could have done if they'd been able to carry on their early second half of the season momentum. So I think they needed to sort of consolidate a little bit, to be honest, and make sure that, as James Vowles has said many times, get their systems working correctly so that they knew where everything was, where it was coming from, when it was coming, and how they could get the car built. And I think we heard in their release today that the chassis arrived a week ago, so the mechanics have been flat out for a week just putting it together, and that's really the way it should be. It's all about making sure that you got your manufacturing times and delivery dates of every component ready. There's no point in having the wing mirrors sort of thing first thing, if you know what I mean. They're the last thing you put in the car. So it's about making sure you've got everything lined up in the correct order to allow the mechanics to put it together. And I think they've achieved that this year, which is a big step for them because the last couple of years they've been fighting that and just getting ready in time. They've run the car now, so it is a good step forward. I think they haven't. It's an evolution of last year's car, I suppose you would say, really, as opposed to anything revolutionary. But they have updated the rear of the car with the new Mercedes gearbox package, which gives us a hint of the way Mercedes will probably be going as well, because as far as I know, it is the 25 gearbox package. So they've gone from a pull rod system on last year's suspension to a push rod. So there are changes within the car, but I don't think you would call it revolutionary. And I don't think we'd see that now. This is the fourth year of these regulations, and I think we all want to sort of see these cars and go, wow, look at that, that's different. But that's not going to happen. So it's all about detail, just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I think that's what Williams have focused on, really, to try to get themselves back to where they think they should have been at the end of last season.
It's something that perhaps you're in a position to give us a little bit more insight into, because everybody's talked about how much more tidy everything is under the bodywork, just better put together, parts manufacturing of a better standard. That's a very difficult thing, I guess, for people to visualise because we can't see it. But how important is it when a car just comes together well and you look at it and think, yeah, this is all right and as it should be?
Yeah, it is critical. I mean, it's not only just critical for the actual car build, but it's motivation, motivation, I think, for the mechanics putting it together, because they know when they get the parts, they've been designed correctly, they've been manufactured correctly, they've been inspected, checked, everything like that's happened correctly. And when they get a part now and it goes click clunk onto the car, it's like building a jigsaw. All the bits fit together, you've got a very good jigsaw. And to be honest, it gets the mechanics, when that happens, they just take a little bit more pride in what they're building. And that's important, especially for reliability. Whenever you get an ugly car or something that's been shoehorned together, the mechanics tend to want to get the cover over it as quickly as possible. Whereas if it's nice, they'll give it an extra coat of polish. And during that period, they might just notice a little bit of a loose bodywork fastener or something. And that's important. It just gives them that motivation and pride. And the pride in their product, really, that they can set out in the pit lane and everybody look at it and think, oh yeah, that's a nice little package. So, yeah, that only happens through, as you said, the systems working correctly to make sure that everything's coming in the right order at the right time. So it's not an easy task and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's a big hurdle at the beginning of building these cars, because they are hugely, hugely complicated.
And let's have a bit of a look at the car in terms of the aero side of things. Obviously, you always like to have a look at a front wing. I think they did have something on that was a little bit different to what we've seen before, rather than just bolting on an old one, although sometimes it's just down to the wing choice. So what do you see aero-wise in that area?
Yeah, it is a little bit different from our comparison to last year, I suppose. They've moved the loading of the flap assembly, which obviously affects the loading of the wing, a little bit further inboard. and that just moves the mass flow to a slightly different position. I think it's correct to be fairly inboard. It's correct for the front wing to fall off gradually as it goes outboard. Last year's front wing had its highest loaded position sort of just inside the front tyre, which to me wasn't correct, because that mass flow through there will be pulling air out through from underneath the nose section. And what you really want is as much flow as possible underneath the nose section, because that's the leading edge of the floor that really matters. That central section is what the diffuser really works on. So I think that front wing flap arrangement, it will probably change, because from circuit to circuit we see that it does. But it is, to me, it's a better package than what they had last year. And also the main plane. They've raised the leading edge across the main plane in general. It was fairly high leading edge at the inboard end, really, where it goes from the transition from underneath the nose. But then it dropped down quite quickly. And whereas this year it stays higher. So once again, that allows more airflow to go, or will entice more airflow to go underneath the wing, which again allows the wing to work a little bit harder on it, but still leaves the airflow in decent condition to help the underfloor. So subtle changes in the front wing, and as you say, as you start, the airflow starts at the front. But it is subtle changes. It's nothing revolutionary. But again, that's what an evolution should be: tidy up what you've got, knowing your deficit, and try to make it, work that little bit better. And I think James Vowles has said, they've gone for the more consistent downforce rather than peaky downforce. And I've always said that with these cars. The problem with a ground effect car is you can exploit it dramatically and create huge peak downforce, but the driver can't cope with it. And once he gets bitten once or twice, he gets shy of it and stays away from that limit. So what's the point in having this peaky downforce that A, gives the drivers a bit of a spooky ride, and B, he doesn't use anyway. So you're better to go for this nice stable package and let the drivers exploit their talent. As far as front suspension is concerned, it is more or less identical to last year as far as we can see. I'm sure there's some changes in how the inboard operation of the rockers and etc. work, but as far as a visual concept, what we see, it's more or less the same. So again, it's something, if it is more or less the same, it's something that's not going to cause them any grief. It might not be the best in the world, but it's also going to be reliable and they understand it. So changing setup-wise, they'll have a pretty good handle on that.
Yeah, and they very much talked about, in terms of that point you were making about consistency, that they wanted a car with better through-corner balance, a little less yaw sensitivity, less sensitive to the wind, so that's encouraging from that perspective. And we did also see some changes to the side pod profile as well, didn't we? Yeah,
I mean, they've gone to town a little bit more on the side pods. They've created more of I think you call it a bathtub effect, where the side pod has a higher outside edge. The bodywork, the minimum radius on the bodywork is stipulated, so in reality that's why you see these large rads, large radius blends on the bodywork, because the regulations are trying to eliminate sort of edges, fins and things like that sticking up to direct the flow. So you'll see them, they're more curvious than they were before, because that's got less chance of setting up vortices which are disruptive to the following car. But they've concentrated on squeezing in around the engine, the bodywork and around the engine, and that bathtub effect to get more flow into the centre of the car. And that raised sort of outer edge will help contain that bathtub effect, so the flow won't tend to get pulled out and around the rear tyre. So I think that's all, again, small changes, but I think there are changes that you could effectively say will improve the consistency and the robustness of the airflow in and around the back of the car, which is the thing that helps the diffuser work. You want to get as much airflow in there as possible so the beam wing can work well, and if the beam wing works well, then it works the diffuser well, so then you get more downforce from the underneath of the car, and if the flow's consistent, then you get more consistent downforce from the under floor of the car. So that's all good stuff really as well. Again, it's hard to quantify because it's just numbers, but it's numbers that should be, as they say, consistent rather than peaky.
And from what you've seen, does this all seem to hang together? Is the direction they're taking sensible for a team in their position? There doesn't seem to be anything on the car you're looking at and thinking, well, what are they doing there? That doesn't make any sense. That's normally quite positive for a team that's trying to push up from 9th place as they were last year.
Yeah, I used to say I think 9th place was a bit disappointing for them, and it all happened at the end of the season because they deserved probably better than that. But recovering from the massive crashes that they had and keeping their head down and actually going racing was commendable to them. But I think that the new gearbox package with the push rod and more anti-lift on the rear suspension, which has come with that package, will be good for the consistency as well, the braking consistency of the car, the stability of the car on braking and then corner entry. Because, when the driver hits the brake pedal and he feels that the rear is going to just pass him, I mean, it's amazing how sensitive these drivers are. If you change the amount of movement in the rear of the car, let's say by, a millimetre out of something like which is probably about 20 or 25 millimetres movement during braking, if you could change it 1 millimetre to the driver, that's like night and day. It makes a massive, massive difference. So if you can make that a little bit more stable under the braking, the driver will then commit to the corner again a few kilometres quicker. And because of that, it's just confidence. You just build confidence from the first time you hit the brake pedal. The rear's nervous. You're thinking, when's the rear end going to pass me? So I think they've done a good job in that. I think the things that I can see on the car are all positive in that direction. And with Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz as teammates, that's a pretty strong driver pairing. We can compare drivers. We can say Lewis Hamilton and Leclerc or Piastri and Norris. All that stuff. But to be honest, Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz are very, very competitive drivers. And I think, and experienced. And I think if Williams can give them a car that allows them to be confident in driving it, that we will see, their ability will stand out, because I think they are two very, very confident drivers.
And as a final point, it's less about the car directly, but it's been quite relaxed here today at Silverstone with the first run of the car, given all the problems they had last year, how much they've come on. Should we read a lot into that? Is it encouraging if a team can have a car out and running, took its first run out of the garage in public, people were watching, including yourself, the YouTube stream, I was in the garage next door watching it go out, so it'd have been really embarrassing if things had gone wrong. Does that assurance count for anything, or do you just look at it and think that people like me are talking it up?
No, I don't think you're talking it up. I think it's important. But the most important thing, I think, is it's something that James Vowles recognised in Williams. When he went there, that was the systems that didn't work. They needed to have confidence in the fact they could set a date, X time ago for this release, achieve it with a car that you could actually run, and not just a car you're trying to finish. So I think it's important, because you can sit back and say, well, that's step one in our improvements. And that also helps you with development planning, with component planning. All that stuff comes together to make it happen. Like clockwork, I suppose you might call it. Yeah, there'll be fraught times, and I've had them, I've had pre-season releases where it didn't go as planned. I've had them where this car is still sitting on blocks of wood, really, and nobody could see. We've had where the car's been running at the release, so it's always pressure for it to happen. But it's great when it does do it. It's great when it does achieve the right thing. And I think, as I say, that gives everybody confidence that they have a system in place now that's a lot better than it was a couple of years ago. And, it's right to build on, I suppose you might call it.
Yeah, so it's very much a story for Williams of good, solid start. Obviously, we don't know how fast the car's going to be, but there's nothing that you've seen or we've seen to give us too much cause for concern. I guess that's the overall summary.
Yeah, the overall summary really is, first thing, you have no idea what others have done. So you're only working down your own path. You're going as far as you can down your own path, believing in what you believe is the negatives and trying to rectify them. And at the end of the day, you won't know until sort of third or fourth race of the season, when everybody gets to sort of act together and gets the car up and running to the best of its ability, I suppose. But what I'm seeing in the Williams is that it should be a car that, with those two drivers, is challenging, if not fairly well into Q3, which is the important thing. And, let's not dream about standing on the podium just yet. If they can do that and score points at most events, even small points, but, medium points now and again, then I think they'll have achieved the step that Williams need to do for 2025.
And we'll find out how big a step they've made over the coming months. Thanks very much for your insight there, Gary. If you'd like a bit more from Gary, as always, there's an in-depth technical analysis on the race website, so head to therace.com and don't forget the hyphen if you'd like to read that. And of course, we've got a new season of the Race F1 Tech Show with Gary coming up, so if you'd like some wisdom from Gary Anderson, subscribe to that and we'll be back podcasting there very, very soon. So thanks, Gary. Thanks to John for earlier. We've got a few days break now before we get to the O2 event for the livery launch, and then more cars will break cover. But stay with us for everything you need to know from F1 launch season.
The Athletic.